Hello everyone and welcome. So my name is Richard Seabrook from Smart Data Foundry. I'm delighted that you could all join us today. I shall introduce the panel very shortly, but first of all, make sure you're in the right room. We are here today to talk about how we use real world data and also synthetic data, which we'll talk about, to help solve societal problems, help with vulnerable customers, look at regulatory innovation, that side of things. So let me introduce my panel. So Wullie, if you'd like to say a few words, just in terms of who you are, where you're from.
Thanks, Richard. Good afternoon. Just went afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Wullie Grubb. Come from Virgin Money, based over in Glasgow, and lead what we call our strategic analytics and data science capability. And what that really boils down to is how can we use the data that we've got to engage, excite, help, support our customers, and that can be in a range of ways, from, as Richard's touched on, the vulnerable customer part, through to customer communications, research, and everything else that goes along with it. And excited to be here.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Lowe. I am a manager in something called the Innovation Lab at the FCA. I know it says Digital and Data Services up there, but recently went through a bit of a rebrand. So my team is responsible for two things really. We have a thing called tech sprints, which are like hackathons that we do at the FCA. We're not allowed to call them hackathons because we're the regulator. And we also have something called the Digital Sandbox, and this is a platform that we use for our tech sprint program. But we also have recently launched a permanent digital sandbox where we can give a broader range of assets for people to innovate on and develop. So that can be across multiple topics, whether it's consumer vulnerability. We just recently did a greenwashing tech sprint. Or it could be APP fraud, which is something we're doing next week.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And Bryn.
Excellent. So I'm Bryn Coulthard. I work alongside Richard at Smart Data Foundry. I'm our Chief Product and Technology Officer, so leading the kind of product, data science and engineering teams as we drive forward our mission to unlock the power of financial data to help address societal challenges and help drive innovation within financial services.
Brilliant, thank you Bryn, Matt, Wullie. So I will kick off with a couple of questions for the panel, but then please we'll make sure that you guys have plenty of time to ask questions as well. So please raise your hand, ask your question loud and clear, and I'll make sure that we get it to the right panel. But Wullie, I'm going to come to you first. So Virgin Money, serving a huge amount of customers across the country. How can banking data help in terms of solve some of those issues with vulnerable customers, help with some of the big societal issues?
A couple of angles I'll probably just pick up to give some thoughts for that. One is customers, and you're all customers of banks, so you can all think about it from your own perspective, is they interact with banks in a variety of different ways. In a number of cases, that can be traditional manners. Talk to people in stores, in the contact centre, and that's a chance to get some rich data. And that's the very classical way that we think about it, that a lot of this has to be physical or voice orientated. But you also get interactions when you get into digital footprint. So how does a customer use their digital capabilities? Are they visiting certain pages? Are they looking at transactions very frequently? So their usage patterns can become a very, very interesting component of it. Another angle that becomes really interesting, obviously, is that transactional element. So what and how are people actually spending money, and what are they doing with it? That's evolved quite a bit. A simple example I use for a lot of people is, historically, if somebody went to a bank and took £100 out of an ATM, at that point we don't know what's actually happened with that £100. That's just £100 in a wallet. Is that £10 transactions, or is that somebody a £100 transaction? Is that somebody using it for prepay energy, or is it food? But as we see more and more digitisation or contactless type payments, we get a bit more deeper insight into that, and we can start to understand more about what's going on. What that then allows us to do is start to develop products, services, support that is actually tailored and is angled and positioned in a way that really, really supports those customers. So that helps us get support out of that data and drive customer benefit out of it.
Brilliant, thank you, Wullie. Matt, I'll come to you next. So the FCA is obviously well known as the regulator for the sector, but more and more you're doing things in the innovation space. So bring to life, what are you doing with data, and how's that helping to drive innovation that solves some of these issues?
Yeah, sure. I touched on it before when I talked about the digital sandbox environment that we've created. We started experimenting, I guess, with synthetic data back in 2019. That's when I first joined the team, and we're looking at At that point in time, we'll trying to find synthetic data that had money laundering typologies in it. And the problem we're trying to solve is, okay, if you use privacy enhancing technologies, are you able to share information across multiple banks and see whether or not you can pick up some broader typologies? So we've been experimenting with data since then, and we've been thinking about how do we use that to solve problems? How do we make that available to fintechs, to regtechs, where we can sort of lower the barriers of entry where they can't necessarily get access to real data, but they will get access to a synthetic version of it that would have, say some of the characteristics that would, say, have vulnerability characteristics in it, or it could have like money laundering, or in the cases of app fraud, we're working on that with Bryn and his team to create a synthetic data set that has APP fraud typologies in it that we can then see how do we test those solutions against it. So we've made sure that historically we've done that within the context of a cohort or a tech sprint. And on the 1st of August, we launched the digital sandbox, the permanent digital sandbox, where it's open to anybody who has a good, strong business case to come in and start experimenting with those data sets. Now, over time, the digital sandbox has grown to quite a large community. I think we've got over 2,000 registrants at the moment, over 1,000 APIs that are on the sandbox environment as well. But we also have around about 300 data sets. And there's kind of a combination of synthetic data sets, some open source data sets, and some anonymized or pseudonymized data sets. And the whole idea is that we're trying to just encourage that innovation. I call it the long tail of innovation, where we don't necessarily put a focus or a spotlight on a particular theme, but somebody might come up and look at that data or look at that API and just come up with a really good idea, which they can then share with a broader community. And we also give them access to mentors within the sandbox environment as well, so they can reach out and they could be a subject matter expert in any type of field, but they could also be a subject matter expert in, say, trying to help an organisation scale.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think those are really good examples of where you've got a bank that's using their own data to help drive innovation. You've got the FCA that's also using other sources of data to help drive innovation and kind of ignite the sector. Bryn, I know Matt's just touched on synthetic data there in terms of what they're doing, and that's a large part of what we're doing at Smart Data Foundry. Can you bring to life a little bit in terms of how that data is helping drive some of those innovations, helping solve some of those problems?
Yeah, so I mean, I think synthetic data is kind of pretty rapidly evolving area at the moment. There's a lot going on there, but I think one of the things we see with synthetic data is giving people the ability to get data they couldn't otherwise get.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's data that a fintech wants bank data, but they haven't signed a deal with a bank yet. I missed a session earlier on, but I think there was a bit of chat around that. So how do you get access to a startup fintech? If you've got a B2B proposition, till you get that other business to do business with, you don't have their data. So we can help them with that. We give them synthesized data that gives them the value of the data, but doesn't require them to have that customer there. And then if you're going into some form of greenfield space where you might be an existing business with a lot of data, but if you're moving into a new sector, you don't have that sector's data. Again, we can provide data that does that. And then equally, we can bring together data sets, and some of the work that we're doing with Matt and his team just now and launches next week is the ability of creating integrated data. So, in the real world, even if Virgin wanted to hand over all their data and O2 wanted to hand it all over, to get the two of them to come together is quite a complex thing. And then obviously, the more sectors you add into that, the more complex that gets. It's not completely straightforward with synthetic data, but it's a lot easier to achieve. And that's some of the stuff that we're doing with Matt and the team just now.
Brilliant, thank you, Bryn. Just combining your two worlds with what Matt's doing with the Innovation Lab and what you're doing with synthetic data. Matt, how have you seen fintechs embrace the opportunity and the challenge? Are you starting to see new streams of innovation coming through based on the data that's becoming available?
So we're quite sort of new in the journey on the permanent digital sandbox. I think since we've opened it, we've had over 20 applications, and they are generally your fintechs or your early innovators. So it's a bit hard to tell at the moment exactly what some of the products or services that we would see coming off the launch of that environment. Although we have in the tech sprint model and with our cohort models seen fintechs, regtechs come through, whether it's sustainability or whether it's consumer vulnerability, seeing some of those fintechs come through and then get some further investment. I can never always completely point towards what they've done in the sandbox to them getting that investment, although we do ask them in follow-up surveys. But there is that opportunity where they do get exposure to a community. The other thing that we're looking at doing at the moment, I can't say too much about it, is trying to develop an incubator network. So we work with the various incubators across the UK and thinking about how do we connect the dots between our work and what we're doing, and then putting some of those fintechs or those solutions into that incubator network and can fan that out and try to keep the momentum going on that solution development.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. Let me pause there and come to the room. You've heard from the guys in terms of some of the things they're doing. Do you have any immediate questions you'd like to put to the panel? Gentleman at the front there.
To Matt, I was looking at your digital sandbox. Is this open to individuals as well? Or is it purely for companies and firms?
You can come in as an individual. You just need to, if you start looking at the application form, you'll see that it's asking questions about what's your innovation, have you got a testing plan, are you working with other organisations? There is a filter meeting that we have every 2 weeks just to go through the applications that have come through, and then we kind of make a decision on whether or not you get access to those assets or not.
So the assets, you're talking about the data sets?
Yep, the data sets, the APIs that are on the platform. We're starting to try and build the community as well. So that is another really important feature.
Can I use that data set and work on it on your portal system? Or do I have to go to my AWS account and work on it there? How do you approach that?
Yeah, okay, we get into some technical stuff, but that's fine. The API, so you can access the data via an API, but there are restrictions on how much data you can take off the platform. So you can work on your local environment and you can test out, say, potentially, does the data actually work for you?
You have all the open source.
And you can also use the Jupyter Notebook. Yeah.
Similar to all the other financial cloud systems.
Yeah, or you come into the Jupyter Notebook and then you've got access to everything, but you play with it within the environment.
Within your environment,
yeah.
You've got Coulthard and all that stuff.
Jupyter Notebook.
Local in your servers.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's open, and the application form, you have to put a justification on.
Yeah, there needs to be. It still needs to be a bit of a business case, and we've got our regulatory sandbox, and I should be pitching that as well because we're a bigger team, and that's about regulatory guidance. To get through that process, because there's actually regulatory guidance, I'm not going to say it's a lot harder, but it's a lot more rigorous. But for the digital sandbox, it is a bit more light in terms of the application process, and we try to move through them relatively quickly as well. There's no guarantees you'll get in, but it's you really need to think hard about your business case, your innovation, what are you trying to do, and that's what we discuss in our filter meetings.
So on your application, there's business cases situation where you have to justify.
Yeah, what have you got a testing plan? Do you agree to come back and show us what you've been doing? Those sorts of things, and there's a few caveats around that.
So it sounds like there's a conversation to carry on over lunch there, I think. Form an orderly queue behind you.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is like I have a couple of kind of companies I work with, and I'm not sure. I'm very happy to use some of their data sets, but like I said, that's restricted. I won't be able to get access to them. But that's the stuff I would be interested in. You've got a whole section of open data sets on bond interests and that kind of stuff, which sounds interesting.
Yeah, definitely have a look at it. I mean, I encourage everybody to have a look at the website now, and you can see, you can log in and you can register to the digital sandbox, and you can actually view the data sets that are available. You can also view the APIs that are available. You just can't access it until you're part of a team or a project.
That's read only, yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Other questions in the room? Gentleman at the front.
I have a question for Bryn. So you mentioned the importance of synthetic data and providing it. What are some of the ways that you go about gathering them?
So at Smart Data Foundry, we specialise in agent-based simulation data. So there's obviously a variety of techniques, kind of synthetic AI, synthetic doubles, machine learning doubles. We focused on agent-based simulation, mainly because that takes away the need for having that seed data set. So, as you go back to my earlier comments of a fintech doesn't have data, well, you can't simulate something you don't, or you can't double something you don't have. So we use agent-based simulation. Again, it makes it a lot easier to deal with integrated data sets and stuff like that. So we apply some AI techniques around the edges of that, but fundamentally it's an agent-based simulation model we use.
Lady at the front.
Can you maybe give some examples of how your synthetic data model has helped vulnerable populations?
Yes, I'll give it a bash. So we've worked with a number of fintechs. We worked with one recently. They've just come out from kind of pre-launch to launch. So they were focused on credit scoring models, so KYC type approaches. So depending on, I guess, your the definition of vulnerable, but things like credit scoring are very mainstream just now. If you've got a good job, a good house, and all that kind of stuff, you get a good credit score. If you kind of fall off the edge of that somewhere, then you fall into bad credit score and you pay twice the amount of interest and everything else. So we worked with a fintech. They were looking to develop an alternative solution to that, something that was different from the TransUnion or Experian type approach. So again, they were an early startup. They had no data of their own, so they came to us and we provided them with an identity data set that allowed them to do that kind of identity matching KYC type approach. But very much when we talk to them, it's like they wouldn't have got to where they are now as a fully launched business without having access to our data. They used it to prove out their business model, prove out their software, develop machine learning algorithms on. So, in terms of the work we were doing with them, it was mainly kind of technical type work, but what their solution was to try and create a new type of credit scoring solution that would help address kind of wider groups of the market.
Could I just add to that point as well? I think it's really important to understand that when you're talking about vulnerability use cases or typologies or behaviors, however you want to describe it, we need to be really it needs to be really clear about what you're trying to do, because vulnerability covers such a broad range of different characteristics or behaviors. It goes from mental health issues to it could be just it's to credit scoring and demographical type issues. So if you are creating synthetic data, you need to be really clear about what is you're trying to solve. So a different approach you might want to go down is seeing whether you can get anonymized or pseudonymized data sets which have those characteristics in there, but you just can't personally identify an individual to make the data safe if you wanted to experiment with it.
Great, thank you guys. Wullie, a quick question for you before I come back to the room. So conversations there around using synthetic data, which takes away some of the privacy issues in terms of how you share data. You're obviously working with real data from real customers. How do you navigate that privacy landscape to make sure that you're still able to unlock the value of that data and use it to help customers with all the rules and regulations that exist to protect them?
It's a really easy question, that one. I'm sure that anybody who works inside a financial institution knows that regulatory scrutiny that sits across the top places quite high expectations on it. But I think the starting part, and we heard a little bit of it in the plenary, is transparency. So are we clear, and Matt actually just touched on it, are we clear about what we're trying to do? Because the old, I'm going to say 5-10 years ago, there was a lot of, let's just get data, let's just store it, let's then work out what we're going to do with it. You have to start with privacy up front, so privacy by design. What do we want to capture data? What data do we want to capture? What do we want to use it for? How are we going to do it? And then put all of that down into, whether you call it an ethical data change assessment, that was an old term we used to use, we're now on data privacy assessment, and then walk that through as use cases, build up MVPs, iterate, because you will find change. And this is a challenge we've had as a particular team when you get into building ML models. You can't always answer all those questions that I've just rhymed off at the start, because you don't know what's going to be predictive, you don't know what data is going to be useful, you don't know what technique you're going to use, but you've got to take somebody on the journey with you on that. You can't just go, just let me build an ML model to do this, just let me collect data, I think it will be useful. You've got to have an open conversation, an adult conversation about, right, we think there's some value here, this is the steps, these are the points we're going to put in that we check, we're going to help you by allowing you to see everything that we do. We'll discard it, we've got good retention policies, we've got good approaches. And I think if you bring your compliance, your data protection teams into the tent, to use that language, you get a much better outcome with it. And we've certainly seen that. That's an approach we've really embraced in about the last probably 18 to 24 months, about being much more collaborative in the way that we work with those kind of functions. And that is definitely accelerating our time to seeing value is significantly reduced, because we spend less time question back and forth and getting value. So,
great, thank you, Wullie. Any other questions before I dive into my next one? So, question for yourself, Bryn. So, generative AI has just never been out the news for the last couple of months. How do you see that playing a role in helping vulnerable customers?
So I think there's quite a lot going on, obviously, in that AI, Gen AI space. I think the standard AI stuff's more advanced just now, so things like fraud prevention, fraud detection, I think is getting well deployed within the banks just now. And obviously, anybody that could fall a victim of fraud, nobody wants to be that person. So, Matt's doing loads of work on that, APP fraud, money laundering, all that type of stuff. So there's lots of activity going on there. I think, we touched on an earlier question about credit scoring, opportunities to create new credit scoring models, insurance type scoring models. AI's got a lot to do there. I think when you get into generative AI space, it's a lot more nascent just now within the banks, but they're all starting to embrace it and look at how they deploy that. I was in a session in here before this, and it was an ML architect was talking. I think the big challenge with the generative AI just now is the foundational models and what they're based on and what they're trained on, and that's a real red flag for banks, and I'm sure Matt and some of his colleagues in the FCA have got a lot of focus on that just now. But I think as that matures and the foundational models get better understood and people start to build their own foundational models, then it's going to open up some real opportunities. There's some probably simplistic things like natural language translation, taking away the jargon and deciphering legal documents into kind of plain English while still protecting the legal version of it. Translation services, so people in foreign languages where they struggle, that becomes a lot more transparent. Getting to kind of a proper voice interaction rather than that kind of Alexa yes no type question answer. So they're the kind of fairly low end stuff. I think it will start to open up a lot wider opportunities beyond that as well, and bringing some of the kind of AI techniques around things like fraud and credit scoring and stuff, along with some of the generative AI stuff that's coming through. I think we'll start to see some interesting opportunities. But I think getting that foundational model approach is probably the big barrier to entry just now for the banks.
That's interesting. So there's some very practical things, as you talked about, just in terms of people that can't, maybe English isn't their first language, as well as some of the deeper machine learning and AI. Matt, from a regulator point of view, is this something that really excites you that's going to happen to the sector, or what's the view?
A bit of excitement, a bit of fear, I guess. I mean, as a regulator, we do want to understand the opportunities around AI, but we also need to understand some of the risks. And we have done a series of workshops internally just to kind of get our head around what does it actually, all the buzz around AI at the moment, what does it actually mean for the industry and how do we respond to it? I can't give too much away apart from Nikhil had announced that we're going to do like an AI sandbox lab. We haven't quite come up with a name yet. I like lab better. But essentially just to try and make sure we understand some of the solutions that are coming through, what is being developed, and working alongside our emerging tech and research team, working alongside the Reg Sandbox Innovation Pathways team, working with the DRCF, which is the Digital Regulatory Cooperation Forum, which is ICO, CMA, I know I'm just alphabet soup here, but Ofcom, and working together to try and understand what that means for cross sectors as well. So there is a lot of work going on, but there is that kind of, yes, there is opportunities here and we should be trying to embrace them where we can in a safe way, but we also need to understand what some of the risks are as well. If that's algorithmic biases that are being put into products that are giving out mortgages to people who that will not necessarily, not hitting your vulnerable populations as much as what it should because the data's poor or the algorithm is poor.
Brilliant, thanks Matt. Just looking for any other questions. Yes, gentlemen there.
Question from the panelists. So heading into 2024, what's your what are you most excited about from either a real-time data or synthetic data perspective? What's a big milestone that you can see on the horizon that either excites you or, to Matt's point, scares you a little bit as well heading into next year?
Who wants to go first?
Great question, thank you.
Well, kind of everything is the simple answer, but to try and pick a couple out, all of these, Matt actually just touched on it, everything is an opportunity and a threat in its own right, so you've kind of got to try and pick them out. But being a mainstream bank, and most banks, insurance companies have similar kind of challenges when you've got different products, different lines. that means that you've got different data points. You've not got a consistent data set for every single customer because they have different products which behave in different ways in their own right, or even if you've got the product, some people might use a personal current account as a pseudo savings account. Some might use it as, well, my salary comes in there, but I then move that money to another account that's a joint account. Some people, all salaries come into the one account. There's no one size fits all model to it. Where some of the synthetics can help is when you've got those little bits of smaller pockets of it, can I actually get value out of that data? Can I do infills? Can I get to scale? And how can I use that to help us understand and produce models or predictives that become, I guess, more reliable, more powerful for us? In the same breath, in some ways the threat is actually the speed of evolution or the speed of excitement about evolution in this space I would kind of get to. And it's, we all talk about LLMs and ChatGPT and everything. We've all played, I'm sure everybody's played with it. I used to play rugby, not very well, right? But my experiment with it was, who's Scotland's most capped or record try scorer or most capped player? And this was just after the Six Nations. And it comes back and it says Ross Ford. I'm like, no, it's not. BBC told me it was Stuart Hogg. And I'm like, Stuart Hogg. The bit that then scared me actually about it was, it said, sorry, you're right. I'm like, whoa, you've now freaked me out. How? And I thought, right, I'm going to be sad. How do you know I'm right? I've went and read the internet. It was kind of the answer it came back. It wasn't in those words, but I validated it on some other sources to confirm that that's right. And by the way, I'm only trained up to 2019, I think it is. And I'm like, that is freaky. You gave me the wrong answer, but you were able to get to the right answer in there. That part, for me, as an individual, was, whoa, that's really interesting. So I'd encourage you to, bit of fun, try and get it to give you the wrong answer, not just the one that's on LinkedIn, what's 2 + 2. My wife says it's 5, right? Just everybody's done that one, but find one that you know is wrong because of the data point or the age of the data, and it's interesting.
Thanks, Wullie. I'm going to ask it later on if you were any good at rugby to see what it says. But Matt, to you.
So we kind of touched on AI, and that's something that I think will be a real focus for the department of the innovation department and the FCA. For the next year, we're also really interested in open finance, and in terms of the data opportunities that is opening up, we are exploring a market abuse AI type tech sprint where we're looking at the markets data that we collect, and we collect a lot of it, to see how we can use AI to detect market abuse. And the other things that we're interested in is open finance, which is working with CFIT. I'm using another acronym. Centre of Finance Innovation Technology, I think that's it. So working with them and thinking about open finance data and how do we start to knit some of that together to either give consumers better products or let them manage their money a bit better. So they're kind of the two main focuses I think we'll be looking at on the horizon next year. Both have got really great opportunities, I think, and I'm really excited in terms of we've got some really good meaty things to focus on. I don't think that AI conversation is going to go away in a year. I think we'll probably be talking about and might become a thematic thing that covers all of our work for the next few years at least.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And Bryn.
Yeah, so I guess with our focus on synthetic data, the answer sounds fairly similar to Matt's, I think. But AI, the opportunities that creates for us at Smart Data Foundry, the adoption of synthetic data to power that. I think everybody's looking for data to train models on. I don't think anybody's found the magic answer for that yet. So that's definitely one. And then the open finance space again. So where does open banking go into open finance? I'm part of the CFIT team as well just now. So they're pushing that quite hard and really looking to try and make some real progress on that over the next year. So that kind of journey from open banking to open finance, the opportunities that creates for consumers, particularly vulnerable consumers, I think could be quite interesting over the next year. Although, I think that will take 2, 3, 4 years to come to kind of production, probably, if you want to use that phrase. But I think, the next year should see a direction of travel getting set for that.
Brilliant, thank you, Bryn. I'm conscious that we're just about out of time, but let me just check for any final questions in the room. Gentleman at the back.
Do you think digital currencies are the future? And the answer is yes. Where do you think your role comes into future-proofing us or looking at that future?
Is that directed at me?
I don't know.
Who would like to go? Matt?
Digital currencies in terms of, we not work specifically within our team, not working with digital currencies. Obviously, there's the crypto world, and we have got a crypto policy team now, which has been created to sort of understand the policy around crypto. So that's definitely something that the FCA has started to put a bit of a spotlight on. But I'm not close enough to the detail. I mean, apart from when I first started in the innovation department, we would see a lot of those sort of blockchain crypto solutions come through. And I'm speaking outside of the FCA, my personal opinion, I think we've gone through the hype bubble and we're kind of in the trough of disillusionment a little bit on digital currencies. Because I think you need to see some of those use cases coming through that really show how it can be utilised in a way, but it's not quite there yet. But that's me speaking outside of my FCA boundary, so you didn't hear that from me.
Great. I'm going to call it a day there because I don't want you guys to get to the back of the very long queue that will be queuing for lunch. So I'd like to thank Wullie, Matt, Bryn. I hope you've all enjoyed today's session. If you've got any other questions, find the guys over lunch, find myself, and we'll make sure those get answered. But if I have a round of applause for the panel, please. And thank you very much.